Okay, hello and welcome to today's lecture for CS 303. So today is the last lecture in chapter number 6, which is synchronization. Okay. So once again, welcome to CS 303, chapter number 6, lecture number 7. So this is the last lecture for chapter number 6, which is synchronization. And today we will be talking about priority inversion, semaphore busy waiting, and also how some of the popular operating systems perform synchronization. So as such, they use whatever techniques we have discussed, like semaphores and so on. Okay. So in in the first one, in priority inversion, what happens is due to some phenomena, a lower priority process blocks a higher priority process. So due to some synchronization issue, or you can say due to a side effect of using synchronization tools such as locks, a lower priority process may block a higher priority process. So clearly this is undesirable. So we'll discuss this first. Second thing we'll talk about is semaphore busy waiting. So here we'll see that when a semaphore is when a process is waiting on a semaphore value, let's say if it has to acquire a lock and the lock has already been acquired by another process or thread, then any process that wants to acquire the lock does a wait on the semaphore till the lock is released. So while it's waiting, it's just repeatedly executing the condition in the while loop. So this is what we call busy waiting, and then this leads to unnecessary wastage of CPU time. So can we do something about it? So we'll talk about that, and then finally we'll spend a couple of slides on how operating systems perform synchronization. Okay. So now let us get started with the first topic, which is priority inversion. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide number 2, and here we talk about priority inversion. So if you see, I have drawn some pictures, and each picture has a number assigned to it: 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is how we read them in sequence: first 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So first picture shows the scenario of priority scheduling. So here what we have is we have 3 processes or threads, A, B, and C. Each of them has been assigned a priority, and we can have different cases depending on the policy. So we may say a lower priority number implies a higher priority, like we do in Linux, or we can say that a higher priority number implies a higher priority. Okay. So here the convention we use is a higher priority number implies a higher priority. So if you see here, now we can easily see that these 3 processes are arranged in order of priority. So the logic is, given a choice when we can make a scheduling decision, we always pick which process? The process with the highest priority. So here that order would be, first we pick C. It has priority number 3, then we pick B, priority number 2, and finally we pick A, priority number 1. So C, B, A, that will be our scheduling sequence. And this is how we are showing the ready queue. Right? First at the head we have C, then B, and then at the tail we have A. So this is our priority scheduling, right? Very clear. Now let's say we are doing synchronization here. Okay? And for synchronization we are using a lock. So which means that some of these processes have critical sections inside their code, which means that there is a shared variable that these processes may need to modify. So therefore, clearly, to protect against concurrent writes, we need a synchronization mechanism, and here we are using a lock, right, a mutex lock. So if you look at picture number 2, here what we see is A has acquired a lock that C needs. Okay. So now the important thing here is the scheduler will pick the next process to run from the set of processes that are ready to run, right? So it will see which processes are ready to run, and then from that it will pick the process with the highest priority. Now here we have a scenario in which we have two processes ready to run, A and B. Now A has acquired a lock, right, and now C would like to acquire that lock as well. Okay, right. So what we have is A and B are in the ready to run state, and C is in the waiting state. What is C waiting for? C is waiting for the lock. Okay. So C is waiting on A to release the lock. Okay. So A has a lock which C needs to acquire. So C waits on A, which means C cannot run. Okay. Right. So we see what is happening here. We have a shared resource shared among A and C. In order to prevent race conditions, it makes sense to use a mutex lock, right? So locks make sure only one thread is accessing the resource at a time, right? So if a thread wants to access a resource, it must first acquire the lock. If it is unable to acquire the lock, which would happen if another thread or process is using the resource, it must wait till the thread currently accessing the resource releases the lock. So what we have is in number 2, A, B and C have priority 1, 2 and 3 respectively. Thread A is holding a lock on resource that thread C wants to use, right? So C is waiting on A. So thread C must wait for thread A to release the lock, right? Now because thread C is waiting on the lock, it is not available to run. So which means that it cannot move further, it cannot execute further, right? So now ideal scenario, what would happen is, so you have a peculiar situation in which a higher priority process is waiting on a lower priority process to acquire the lock, which is fine because probably when A acquired the lock, C was not even ready to run, which is fine. It can happen. So now ideally what would happen is A would release the lock, then C would acquire it, and then C would run, no problem. But now to complicate matters, what happens is process B becomes ready to run. Okay, B becomes ready to run. Okay. So now the choice is between A and B to select which process should run. So can C be selected to run? No, because C is waiting on A to release the lock. So only when A runs will A release the lock, and only when A releases the lock can C continue. So which means C is not available to run. So which means only A and B are available to run. Okay. Now the question is, which of these among A and B will the scheduler pick to run? Of course, B has a higher priority, 2, which is greater than 1. So the scheduler picks B. Okay, because B has a higher priority. So the effect of that is P will be picked to execute, right? Only once B executes will A be allowed to execute, and only once A executes will C be allowed to execute. So here you can see how the priority inversion is coming. A lower priority process, which is B, is blocking the execution of a higher priority process, which is C. So in other words, the highest priority thread or process C is being blocked from running by a lower priority thread or process B. So clearly this is the opposite of what we intended to happen. What we intend to happen is whenever we have to make a scheduling decision, we only pick the highest priority process, because we decide that it is more important, so it has to run earlier. So if this does not happen, if the highest priority process is not picked, clearly we don't want that. It's not a desirable thing, because then in a way we are saying priority scheduling is failing. So perhaps this process C had a very tight deadline, and now because it will be delayed by B, perhaps by the time C gets the CPU, its deadline will already elapse. So clearly not a desirable situation. So this is priority inversion, where a lower priority thread or process, in this case B, blocks a higher priority thread or process, in this case C, from running. Okay. So how can we avoid this? Okay. So one possible solution is what we call priority donation. So which means temporarily, for a short while, C donates its priority to A. So what is C's priority? 3. So now what is A's new priority after donation? It gets C's priority, which is 3. Now when it's time to make a scheduling decision between A and B, C still can't run because it has to wait for A to release the lock. So now when it's time to make a scheduling decision between A and B, A will go first. A goes first. It executes, does whatever it needs to do with its critical section, gets out, releases the lock. Lock is acquired by C. C can run. C releases the lock, finishes, and then B can run. So things will work as intended. And as soon as A releases its lock, A's priority goes back to 1. Right. So now because the scheduler picks A, then once A releases a lock, C acquires the lock and starts to run. And now A's priority gets back to 1. So C will finish, and then among B and A, B, and then finally A. Okay. So priority donation is one way in which we can solve this priority inversion problem. Okay. So I hope the problem is clear looking at this example, and I hope the solution of priority donation is also clear. So note that a higher priority process can wait for a lock on a lower priority process, which is fine, because probably when A acquired the lock, C was not even ready to run. Right? C was not even ready to run. Only after A acquired the lock, then C decided, or C started to run, but now it has to wait on the lock. Okay. So I hope it is clear. All right. Okay, so now I am on slide 3, and here we're just repeating what we discussed in the previous slide, right? And we are saying that it is possible for a lower priority process or processes to preempt a higher priority process. Not a desirable scenario because it goes against the basic rule of priority based scheduling. At the highest, at any point of time when we need to make a scheduling decision, we always pick the process with the highest priority. It goes against that rule. Okay. So what we saw in the previous slide was a low priority process holds a lock which is needed by a high priority process. In the meantime, a medium priority process becomes ready to run, and now the medium and low priority processes preempt the high priority process. Okay. So how to solve this problem? Use a priority inheritance protocol. Low priority process inherits the priority of high priority process temporarily. So we discussed all of this in the previous slide. Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome to today's lecture for CS 303. Okay, so now I am on slide 4, and this just shows an animation of the priority inversion concept. So the example is pretty much the same as the earlier one. Here we have just named the processes or threads as T1, T2, T3. Okay, otherwise the example is same. So we have T1 with the highest priority, then we have T2 with the medium priority, and then we have T3 with the least priority. Okay. So now initially when we are running, one thing we notice, T1 and T3, which means the lowest priority and the highest priority task, shares a resource S. So of course that means that resource S will be protected by a lock. So initially T3, which is the lowest priority task, is the only active task. So it runs, it acquires the lock is available because T1 has not requested it yet, and so it acquires the lock. And now what happens is, after a while T1 wants to run. Okay. After a while T1 wants to run. So now, of course, between T1 and T3, T1 has a higher priority, so T3 will be preempted by T1. T1 runs for a while, and then now because T1 and T3 share resources, after running for a while, now T1 makes a request for resource S, which means it has to acquire a lock. So what happens when it tries to acquire the lock? Is the lock available? No, the lock is not available because the lock is with T3. Okay. So note that what we are learning here is, once a process or thread acquires a lock, it can be preempted. Okay. Now, so when T1 makes a request on resource S, the lock is not available, so T1 is blocked. Right. Now T3 is running. It still has the lock, and now what happens is medium priority process comes in or wants to come in. So now the scenario is T3 is holding a lock which T1 is waiting on, right? So T1 is blocked, which means it cannot run further. The only way T1 can run further is when T3 releases the lock. So now before T3 can release the lock, T2 comes into the system. Now T2 is a medium priority process. So now the scheduler has to decide between T2 and T3. Right? Can the scheduler pick T1 to run? No, because T1 first needs the lock, and the lock can only be released by T3. So now between T3 and T2, the scheduler does the natural thing, picks the one with the higher priority, which is T2. So T2 does not need any lock, so it picks T2, then T2 finishes, and then T3 is picked. T3 releases a lock, and then T1 can run. So naturally we are seeing the priority inversion concept here, because a higher priority task which is T1, is waiting for a lower priority task, right, which is T2, and in fact T3 also. Okay, so this is the runtime animation showing the priority inversion concept, right? So naturally T1 has to block for a long time. Okay, now I am on slide number 5, and now we will discuss an example of how this priority inversion phenomenon caused a problem with a space satellite. So this is about Mars Pathfinder, right? Mars Pathfinder. So this was sent to Mars by the US by NASA in 1997. Okay. So this vehicle landed on Mars, gathered data and sent data back to the Earth base station. Okay. And this machine used a real-time operating system called VxWorks. Okay. So the issue that was observed with this machine was, so of course it had hardware, and then it ran the VxWorks, which is a real-time OS. So the problem that was observed was that the system started to experience resets, right? So what's happening is system is running fine, doing what it is supposed to, and then suddenly it will restart. It will reset, and then again and again. So the scientists were puzzled, why is the system doing resets again and again. Okay. So when they tried to diagnose the problem, they actually found out that this was because of the priority inversion problem. So what they saw was there were three kind of tasks or threads, right? One was the information bus management thread. This was of high priority, it ran frequently, and the job of this thread was to move data in and out of the system bus. So bus is sort of shared platform for used for communication, like a computer and so on. So there was an information bus management thread whose task was to move data in and out of the bus. This was high priority, it ran frequently. Another one was the meteorological data thread. Okay, meteorological data thread, and this was of low priority and ran less frequently. Okay, and this thread used the information bus to publish its data. So probably it was capturing some data from Mars, which it was observing using sensors, cameras, and so on, and it was publishing this data onto the bus, right, where it was probably then communicated back to the Earth base station. So this was a low priority thread which ran less frequently, right? So perhaps publish the data once an hour, once a day, or something like that. More of a bad job. Third was a communications thread, which was of medium priority. So an information bus management thread of high priority, meteorological data thread of low priority, and a communications thread of medium priority. Now all these threads were protected by locks. So they, you can see that they're mostly dealing with the communication and data, right? All of them. So it's definitely very likely that they, are operating on shared data. So because of that, all these threads were protected by mutex locks. Okay. So you can see now sort of the stage is set for this priority inversion. similar to what happened in our earlier slides. Okay. So now I am on slide 6. So with those threads, what actually went wrong, what was observed was that the medium priority communications thread, okay, medium priority communications thread was scheduled during the short interval, while the high priority information bus thread was blocked waiting for the low priority meteorological data thread. Okay. So which means the initially what happened was the low priority thread ran, it acquired the lock. Now this lock was needed by the high priority thread. Right. So obviously high priority thread is waiting for that low priority thread to release the lock, and then the medium priority thread becomes ready to run. Okay. So now you know the rest of it. Now when it's time to pick, the medium priority thread is picked. Then it runs, then the low priority runs, and then the high priority runs. So we have priority inversion. And to make matters worse, the communication thread, which was a medium priority thread, was a long running thread. The medium, so we know that the medium priority process or thread blocks the high priority process or thread. And the next question is, for how long does it block? It so turned out that the medium priority thread was long running. Okay, so which means it blocked the high priority thread for a long time. Okay. So naturally, when you're you're implementing a priority based algorithm, and if your highest priority thread is blocked for quite a long time, then as a protection mechanism, so what's happening is a medium thread is hogging the CPU for a long time. So as a protection mechanism, we have a timer, and that timer went off, thinking something had gone wrong, and the system could not detect that this was due to the priority inversion problem, because it was not programmed in the system to detect that priority inversion and to find a solution for it, or to implement a solution for it. So system did not know what the issue was, and essentially as a sort of a safety mechanism, the system was reset. So obviously the correct way is to do something like donation of priority, and that would have solved it. So this tells us that this was a real problem which affected this Mars Pathfinder. So for more details on this story, you can visit this Microsoft.com website, and then there is a related YouTube video as well that explains this problem. So it would be interesting to read this the article on this website, and also to watch the related video. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 7, and now we move on to a different topic, that is semaphore busy waiting. So we know that semaphores can be of two types. One is a binary semaphore, in which we essentially call as mutex locks. Mutex is a short form for mutual exclusion. Right. So the idea is now you have a set of processes, each having their own critical sections, and in order to ensure mutual exclusion, which means at any point of time, how many processes can be in their critical sections? Only one. So process before entering its critical section acquires a lock. If the lock is available, the process takes it, acquires it, enters its critical section, starts modifying the shared data. Now, if other processes also wish to enter the critical sections at the same time, they will all do a wait on that lock, and they will all the while loop will be true, right? And because of that, they will keep on waiting there, right? So while S is 0, just don't do anything. Wait for S to become non-zero. or positive greater than 0. So they will all wait there, and eventually when the original process exits its critical section, it releases the lock, and then using your scheduling algorithm we can give the lock to some other process. So the main issue here is, the problem here is when a process tries to acquire a lock, and if the lock is already taken, it does what we call busy waiting. So which means it's continuously testing the while loop while s is equal to 0, where s is the lock binary semaphore. So it's continuously checking the value of the while loop, right? And of course, to check the value of the while loop, instructions have to be executed. So CPU time is used up. So we call this busy waiting, which means it's essentially checking the value of the while. So the question is, why not do something more useful, right? Why not give the CPU to some other process, right? Instead of that process or that bunch of processes doing busy waiting. So because the process continuously checks the while loop condition, it uses up CPU cycles. So the question is, to busy wait or to context switch? So rather than doing busy waiting, can we not do a context switch and let some other process execute, right? So that those CPU cycles can actually be used for doing something more important, and later on that process can check its while loop, maybe less frequently, right? So maybe context switch may be better. Of course, it's not an very easy question to answer. We may have a scenario in which busy waiting is still better than context switching, right? So let's think about it. Under what scenario will a busy wait be better than context switching? Okay. In what scenario will a busy wait be better than, or may be better than context switching? Right. So the answer could lie in for how long the locks are being held. Okay. So the locks would be held for a short time, or locks would be held for a long time. So naturally, if the locks are being held for a long time, we have more overhead due to busy waiting, because the locks are being held for a longer time. So there is more busy waiting. You're testing the while condition periodically, and since a lock is being held for a long amount of time, the overhead due to that while loop testing will be more, obviously, right? So, but if the locks are to be held only for a short while, then anyway the busy waiting overhead will also be less, because you're periodically doing that or continuously doing that testing on the while loop, that busy waiting. So if locks are held for a short time, then obviously busy waiting overhead will also be less. So for short lock times, busy waiting may still be okay. But assuming that the locks are held for sufficiently long, again, what is sufficiently long is not defined. It depends on the interpretation. But maybe we define a threshold, and greater than that, we say that if a lock is held for longer than that time, we say it can be defined as quote unquote long. So now, assuming that we need to avoid this busy waiting, how do we go about it? So what we will do is, we will need to modify our definitions of wait and signal. So remember, we had a wait on the semaphore which said while s is equal to 0, continuously test the while loop, and then s minus minus. So we wait on s. If s is 1, while s is 0 is false, you acquire the lock, you do s minus minus. Any other process which does a wait on s when s is 0 has to busy wait in that while loop. So what signal of s does is very simple, s plus plus. Right. So we are already aware of those wait and signal operations. So now what we do is, we propose some modifications to the wait and signal
functions. So instead of busy waiting on a semaphore, the process will block itself. And what this will do is this will put the process in, take it from the run queue, put it in waiting queue, which means the process is blocked. So of course now the CPU scheduler can pick another process to run. So instead of just busy waiting, using up CPU cycles, the process puts itself or blocks itself, and now CPU can select another process to run. We do the context switch. And processes, if they are sleeping, if they are blocking, they obviously need to be woken up, and that can be done by the wake up procedure. So process is restarted by the wake up procedure. Okay. So now let's discuss the revised code for wait and signal. Okay. Okay, so now I am on slide 8, and now we talk a bit about the this solution in which we are implementing the semaphore but without busy waiting. So note that in the original implementation that we discussed earlier, we do have busy waiting. So here we modify the semaphore implementation so that we avoid the busy waiting. So we note that with each semaphore there is an associated waiting queue. Okay, which is populated by whom? Which is populated by processes or threads which are waiting on that semaphore. So you may have a shared lock, a lock shared among n processes or n threads. So you have a waiting queue which is populated by all the processes or all the threads that are waiting for that lock, for that mutex semaphore. So this queue can be implemented as a linked list. So you have a collection of nodes linked together. Each node has two data items. One is a value of type int. Okay, we'll soon see what this is used for. And the other is a pointer to the next node or next record in the list. Okay, so linked list. Each node having an integer value and a pointer to the next node in the list. Right. So each of these nodes will be associated with one particular process. Two operations we have: block and wake up. Block, place the process invoking the operation on the appropriate waiting queue. So if a process runs this block operation, we take the process and put that process in the appropriate waiting queue. So this could happen when will this happen? When will the process, at the occurrence of which event will the process be put in the waiting queue? Simple, when the semaphore is not available. Okay, so it will block rather than doing busy waiting. Right. Next is wake up. So now when the semaphore is available, obviously we have to wake up one of the processes from the waiting queue. So we have a wake up operation. Remove one of the processes in the waiting queue and place it in the ready queue. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so two operations: block. If a process tests on a semaphore, on the lock it's not available, it blocks. Otherwise it acquires the lock, of course. And then we have a wake up. When the semaphore is available, when the lock is available, we do a wake up, remove one of the processes in the waiting queue, place it in the ready queue. Right. So this is our structure. What it will look like: type def struct semaphore. So semaphore is an alias, a name for this structure. Okay. So when we say type def int length, so which means that length will be an alias for int. So then in our program we can say length x, length y, right? X is 10, y is 12, so on. So here semaphore will be an alias for this this structure. Okay. So it has two components in it: value, which is an int, and a pointer to the next node in the list. Pointer is called list, and its data type is process, right? So each process, so for a process we have a structure, right, and each particular process is a structure variable, right? To represent the process we have a structure which is a complex data type. Each particular process is a structure variable. So this list is a pointer to a structure variable, which means it's a pointer to one process or the other. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 9, and now we look at the implementation of wait and signal. Okay. So both are being done on the semaphore S, right? So what is a semaphore? Semaphore is a structure, right? Complex data type, right? Semaphore is a structure, complex data type, having two members, int value, struct process, star list. So essentially we will have a set of or a linked list of processes or threads which are waiting on that semaphore, and plus we will have a value, okay, integer. So we are doing wait and signal, and the just like we have before, and the arguments are semaphore star s for both of them. So which means we are accessing this semaphore structure using a pointer. Okay, we are accessing this semaphore structure using a pointer. So this is a pointer to a structure variable. Okay, star s, right? So then s arrow value will give us the value, right, for a particular structure variable, right, and then s list will give us the value of the list pointer. So what are these used for? The value is the value of the semaphore, and in this case we will see it can go to minus also, and list is a pointer to one of the processes which is waiting on the semaphore in a queue or a linked list. Okay, so that is what value and list are. Okay, so we are accessing this structure called semaphore using the pointer. So then once we have the pointer s, and using the arrow we can access the individual members which are value in list. So what do we do in wait? We first set the value to minus minus. Okay, and then if the value is less than 0 we do a test. Then we add this process to s list, which means now when a particular process calls wait, and if the value is less than 0, it means the lock or semaphore has already been taken. So which means that the process or thread that called wait, it has to be put in that waiting queue, and the process has to be blocked. So that's what wait is. Signal, what it does is, as expected, increases the value by 1. So one process or the other will call a signal after wait. Value of the semaphore will be increased by 1. Now if the value is less than or equal to 0, we will remove a process P from the list of waiting processes, and then we will wake up that process, which means the state of that process will change from waiting state to the ready state. So then that process will be ready to execute. Okay, so typically one process will acquire the lock, and then we have a bunch of processes waiting on the lock, and then when the original process releases the lock, we wake up one of the processes in the queue, and then that process can resume from where it was blocked, and the first thing it will do is acquire the lock, right, and then continue. Okay, so like that things will move. So we can take a small example in which we have three processes. Okay, so try to visualize it. Three processes P1, P2 and P3 coming in that sequence. All three need to acquire the lock. Okay, so which means all three before acquiring they'll do a test on the lock. If it's available, the lock is available, they will acquire it. Other processes will have to wait. So let's say initially P1 runs. P1 will do a wait on semaphore. We can initialize the value of semaphore as 1, let's say, because it's a lock, right? So first process P1 does a wait and S value minus minus, so which means value of the semaphore is now minus 1, which is 0. Is the value less than 0? No, value is 0. So that the if will be false and the process will finish with its execution of wait. So now the effect is process P1 has acquired the lock. Okay. Process P1 has acquired the lock. Okay. Now let's say process P2 comes, right? So P1 has not released it yet. Process P2 comes, it does a wait on semaphore S, process P2, it does S value minus minus. So now what is the value of the semaphore? From 0 it goes to minus 1. And now P2 will do a test. If S value is less than 0, yes it is, add this process which is P2 to the list, the linked list. So P2 is added to the list of waiting processes, block P2. And now let's say another one comes, P3. It does a wait on semaphore S. Its value, it changes the value of semaphore, reduces it by 1. So now what is the value of the semaphore? Minus 2. Is the value less than 0? Yes it is. Add this process P3 to the list, waiting list as well, block P3. So now the scenario is process P1 has the lock. Right? It can enter the critical section. Process P2 and P3 are blocking in the waiting queue. The value of semaphore is minus 2. Now eventually what will happen is P2 and P3 are blocking, waiting. Now P1 after it exits its critical section, it does a signal on the semaphore, which means it increases the value of the semaphore by 1. Now what is the value of the semaphore? From minus 2 to minus 1. Right? Value is minus 1. Right? So note that negative values are possible. Whenever we have a negative value, it means we have some processes waiting. So value is minus 1. So which means remove a process P from the list and wake up P. So which means it will wake up P2. So now P2 can acquire the lock. So again that lock acquiring, we are not adding it here, adding the code here. So wake up P2 and now P2 can acquire the lock. Okay, and run. Okay. So P2 acquires the lock, does whatever it needs with the critical section, and then does a signal. So P2 does signal. Now the value is increased by 1. So from minus 1 the value changes to 0. If value is less than or equal to 0, yes, it's equal to 0. Remove a process from the list. Remove P3 from the list. Wake up P3. Right? Now P3 is woken up. Now it can acquire the lock. P2 has released it. And now P3 can do its signal. Change the value to 1. Right? And then it can, value is not less than or equal to 0. So it exits. Okay. So in this way, all of the processes can exit. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 10, and these are the last couple of slides, and now we look at very briefly discuss how Linux does synchronization. So Linux provides several mechanisms for synchronization. One of the important ones is concept of atomic integers. So we can declare an atomic integer, ideal for counters which are shared. So atomic integer counter, int value, atomic set, the value as 5, atomic add 10 to the counter, atomic increment the counter, atomic read from the counter. So the key thing here is all of these operations are atomic, which means while these operations are performed, we cannot preempt these operations and give the CPU to some other process. So if a process is performing these operations, or process or thread is performing these atomic operations, while those operations are being performed, the CPU cannot be preempted and given to some other process, which means uninterrupted execution is guaranteed, which is actually what we want. Right? Because the problem comes when we have multiple processes or threads trying to change shared values at the same time. If we can guarantee that a process or thread is changing a value, it is not there is no context switch, it is not interrupted till it has finished that modification operation, then we won't have the synchronization problem. Okay. So one of the ways is using locks, another is to ensure atomic operations. So similarly, we can say these using semaphores, these wait and signal, they also have to be atomic. We don't want multiple processes trying to do wait at the same time. That defeats the purpose. So one option is using these atomic integers and then doing atomic operations on them. All operations performed without interruptions. It has an advantage because there is no overhead of locks. So we heard that, or we discussed that locks have an issue of busy waiting. Although we can sort of avoid that or reduce busy waiting by modifying the wait and signal operations. Okay. Mutex locks are of course available for protection of critical sections. Mutex lock, mutex unlock functions. Task waiting on lock is in sleep state, right, and to be awakened with an unlock. Right? So it goes into, when it's waiting or the lock, it goes into a sleep state and then to be awakened with an unlock operation. Okay, so you can read more about this in the book in section synchronization in Linux. Okay, now I am on slide 11, which is the last slide, and we talk about another technique for this synchronization. So semaphores are provided, and besides semaphores, what Linux does is uses kernel preemption. Okay. So what is this kernel preemption? Right. So here what we are doing is, rather than holding a lock, we are disabling kernel preemption. So which means now our kernel is non-preemptive. What does this mean? What does a non-preemptive kernel mean? If a task is modifying a shared resource, it has to run till completion. No preemption is allowed before the task can run and modify another task can run and modify the shared resource. So our kernel is non-preemptive, which means while a task is executing and trying to modify shared resource, we cannot do a context switch and give the CPU to another task. So which means that the original task which was modifying the shared resource has to finish. Once a modification is done, then only the CPU can be given to the other task. okay, which may need to modify as well. So this is non-preemption, right? Tasks are run from start to finish. Okay, a task cannot be interrupted. The execution of a task cannot be interrupted to give the CPU to some other task. Okay, so we normally kernel preemption is allowed, right? While a task is executing, we do preempt it to execute some other task. So we saw in one of the earlier programs when we had many processes created using fork, and each of them was executing a long loop. So when we looked at the output, we saw that one task was not running from start to finish. One task ran for some time, then we gave the CPU to another, then another, then another. Sort of like round robin, right? But here what we are saying is, if a task is modifying a resource, if it's not, that's fine. But if a task is modifying resource, we disable kernel preemption. So the task has to run till completion, till it has finished modifying the shared resource, before another task can run and modify the shared resource. So that's disabling kernel preemption, and what we are saying is this disabling of kernel preemption will not work on a multiple processor machine, because in a single CPU at any time how many processes can run? Only one. So we can have a synchronization issue if so we have one CPU, only one to run on. So task 1 is running, it's modifying a shared resource, and we preempt it, do a context switch, and then another task starts running, modifying that same resource. So this is the problem, synchronization problem that we have. So if we disable preemption, original task runs from start to finish. Okay. But what happens in a multiprocessor machine? We can easily have a scenario in which multiple tasks are modifying the shared resource on different CPUs. So how do we stop that? Single CPU, it's easy to stop, because there's only one place, there's only one CPU where you can run tasks. So we do non-preemption, because at any point of time only one can run, and we ensure that it's the one which is currently modifying the shared resource variable. But in multiple processors, we can have multiple processes or threads trying to modify or modifying the shared resource at the same time. So this will not work. Okay. So then what we do is we try to use these spin locks. So spinning is just another term for busy waiting, right? So the initial one acquires a lock, right, and then if any other process wants to enter the critical section, it just waits or spins on that lock, and only once the lock is released, it will the other processes can get in. So there are two techniques here. One is disabling kernel preemption, which can solve the synchronization problem, right? Disabling kernel preemption. So our task runs from start to finish. Other technique is using the semaphores and spin locks. So on a single processor machine, what we do is first we disable kernel preemption, and then we can enable it again once our shared modification is done. And on multiprocessors, what we do is we acquire the spin lock, and then we release the spin lock. Okay, so different techniques. Okay, so once again, you can read about this in the appropriate section. Of course, in Linux, when spin locks are used, we need to be careful that or we need to watch out whether locks are being held for a long time. So if locks are being held for a long time, then the spin locks will cause a lot of busy waiting overhead. So then we may have to do something else. Okay. Okay, so I think this finishes the chapter on synchronization. Okay.